Flawed policies and sudden shocks have thrust Lebanon into its worst economic crisis in decades, with its currency collapsing, businesses shutting, prices for basic goods skyrocketing, and the threat of hunger looming for its poorest people. Lebanese have long stood out in West Asia for not letting political upheaval or civil violence get in the way for enjoying the finer things in life. Underlying this lifestyle was a long-standing government policy that kept the value of the Lebanese lira pegged to the US dollar, allowing the Lebanese to interact seamlessly with the world economy. But that system has unraveled in recent months, fueling an economic collapse that has been exacerbated by a government-imposed lockdown aimed at stopping the spread of the coronavirus. The country's unemployment rate has soared to 35%. Lebanese media reported on Friday, June 12, that the exchange rate had tumbled to 6,000 per dollar on the black market, compared to the official peg of 1,507 in place since 1997. As a result of the plunging national currency, demonstrators shut roads across the country with burning tires in renewed nationwide protests. Protesters also rallied against the governor of the central bank, Riyad Salameh, whom protesters accused of having encouraged state borrowing over the decades that they say benefited only the banking and political elite. The cabinet expressed that it would like to see Salameh removed from the position he has held since 1993, but major sectarian political leaders of the country stood firm behind Salameh, threatening that the dollar might plunge to dangerous rates if Salameh is ousted. A nation of 5.4 million on the Mediterranean, with a variety of religious sects and large groups of Syrian and Palestinian refugees, Lebanon has long suffered from internal conflict and spillover from the wars afflicting its neighbors. Its historically weak government has relied on increasing amounts of debt to pay its bills, while failing to carry out reforms that could have bolstered its economy. Welcome to the Mideastream. I'm Marwa Osman. Lebanon's worst economic crisis in decades has already cost thousands of jobs, with unrest stirring again as protesters lashed out at the government's response. The depreciation in the Lebanese lira is driving up prices, hitting disposable incomes and forcing many Lebanese to rein in the free-spending lifestyles they'd become accustomed to. To discuss this issue with us from Beirut is Dr. Hussein Gharbiyi, academic and political commentator from the Lebanese University. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Gharbiyi. Now, flawed policies and sudden shocks have thrust Lebanon into its worst economic crisis in decades, with its currency collapsing, business shutting down, prices for basic goods skyrocketing, and the threat of hunger is looming for its poorest people. How long will the people take this?
The thing is, the Lebanese case is as complicated as ever. Our economy, the Lebanese economy, has never been based on a proper economy which will increase the budget of the Lebanese people. What happens is that the Lebanese economy is based on tertiary sector. This sector needs stability to bring hard currency into the country. While you lose the stability, this sector will cease to function or not to function properly. Mm-hmm. So we don't have a proper economy. Our industry is basically zero, not from now, but from ages ago. So we don't have a production, food production, industry in general is very bad. The cost of production is quite high. We cannot compete with our neighboring countries. Even the facilities to have a basic economy is quite absent. You need electricity, you need water, you need subsidies from the government. The farmers, for instance, if they want to improve their agriculture, they have no way to do that simply because the cost of production is quite high. To have a proper economy, you have to have these three basic elements: mm-hmm. electricity, water, and subsidies from the government, which we lack now. So the surrounding countries exceeded their production, and they competed against the Lebanese economy simply because we cannot compete with them.
Well, with this lack of local productivity and local maybe producing local maybe agricultural products or even industrial products, this has to do with no reforms coming from the government, but we are at very hard times. How do you think the Lebanese public will respond to these hard times?
This is what I'm saying. To have a proper economy, a productive economy, this long-term issue. Now we are in the middle of a crisis. To have a plan, a proper plan to improve the economy, it will take time, years, at least 2-3 years, to find the fruition of the plan. Until now, we don't have a proper plan. In fact, the three elements that I mentioned are going even harder in the society. People cannot find any kind of support from the government or from international
from
organizations.
what you're saying, by tethering the exchange rate to the dollar for over 2 decades, Lebanon effectively subsidized imports from wheat to fuel to luxury goods and vehicles, you name it, allowing the Lebanese to enjoy some sort of a lifestyle that they otherwise would not have been able to attain. How will this new phase, in your opinion, change the Lebanese lifestyle?
The Lebanese should forget about their previous way of living totally, simply because the kind of economy we had before, it was sort of manufactured by politics rather than economy. So our economy wasn't based on our production, but it was rather based on political decision given or taken by or decided by outside powers where the government is working with. So we don't have a proper economy or political production economy. Rather, the economy was based on, as I said, political issues. It maintained stability to the lira for nearly 30 years, but it was a fake stability. The first ordeal Lebanon faced, this stability collapsed altogether. This collapse of the Lebanese currency and economy is politically motivated, and we all know that particularly when the Caesar plan to punish Syria or to sabotage Syria or to limit
the Caesar Act of sanctioning, economically sanctioning both Lebanon and Syria.
This affects Lebanon directly. So we are surrounded. We don't have any kind of way out of this crisis.
So you're saying it's both internal and external pressure on the country here, but Lebanon's historically weak governments that came one after the other after the war, the civil war ended in the country, has relied on increasing amounts of debt to pay all of its bills, while, as we said, failing to carry out any reforms to try and bolster the economy, or at least now unlock international aid because of the current situation in the world all over. That has made it the third most indebted state in the world. Look at its size and look at its debt. It's horrific.
Sure.
This goes to show that the system of government controlled by sectarian warlords have failed. What would be a substitute system to rid the country of the current upheaval?
The thing is, let me explain something to make it clear. The Lebanese system from the beginning was based on service sector rather than a proper economy. The economy we had before the civil war was based on production. We had market throughout the Arab world, but once the civil war started, this kind of economy stopped altogether and was challenged by other countries where they no longer needed the Lebanese production at all. So this was the first phase of economic collapse in the country. Later on, the sectarian system we had sort of it divided the societies between those who are anti and pro Western policies. This kind of policies affected the internal interaction between the Lebanese sectors or sectarian parts. Now, today, after the so-called Arab Spring, until today, Lebanon is split into two divergent or opposing opinion regarding the intervention of the Americans or the Iranians or the Syrians in the Lebanese affair. So the Lebanese society is divided greatly, and this until today hasn't been sorted. And it will not be sorted in the near future at all. So the Lebanon is heading towards more problem, in my opinion, economically and politically.
Well, one last question, Dr. Gharbieh. The pain of the average Lebanese citizen that we see maybe lining up in front of banks, trying to withdraw any of their money while they can't with underneath the scorching sun, wearing masks because of the pandemic. Does this mean that this is the middle class revolution waiting to happen, or even there's no hope?
I'll tell you what, in the Lebanese society, it is sectarian. When it is sectarian, it means we don't have a united people, Shab. We don't have a united people. So a proper revolution, similar to the Iranians or the French or to the Russians, it wouldn't happen. So anyone thinks of a revolution in Lebanon is mistaken. People until today are sorted along sectarian lines. They follow their leadership no matter what. So we don't have a united, even the Lebanese who are on the streets demanding all different things, they don't agree on one proper demand.
Well, unfortunately, they didn't even maybe choose a leadership for the revolution so far, and it seems that it puts the country on the beginning of a very dangerous and serious road ahead, economically speaking, and maybe even security-wise. Thank you very much, Dr. Hussein Gharbieh, academic and political commentator, for joining us to talk about the explosion in the Lebanese lira that is taking the country towards a very steep economic road. Thank you for being with us, and please stay tuned for our next segment about Libya. Libya's conflict has taken a new twist after an attempt by Eastern-based commander Khalifa Haftar to seize the capital Tripoli crumbled rapidly in recent weeks. Both Haftar forces and the GNA forces are built from local armed factions whose shifting loyalties have at times helped determine the course of the conflict. Untangling the conflict in Libya in this following report. For over a year, the UN-backed Government of National Accord GNA in Libya had been under siege by the forces of Khalifa Haftar. Then all of a sudden, it wasn't. On June 3rd, militias aligned with the GNA pushed General Haftar's Libyan National Army LNA out of Tripoli's international airport. The next day, they took back Tarhuna, a city 90 kilometers to the southeast. By June 7th, the oil fields in Sharara were back in the GNA's hands and pumping for the first time since January. The militias are now fighting the LNA in Sirte, the gateway to General Haftar's heartland in the east. Faiza Sarraj, the GNA Prime Minister, claimed this was a fight for the whole of the homeland. Sarraj, however, is not calling the shots. Drawn by Africa's largest oil reserves and over 1,700 kilometers of Mediterranean coastline, foreign armies have piled into Libya. A surge of support from Turkey beginning in December saved Sarraj. It now determines how far the GNA advances. Russia, Egypt, and the United Arab Emirates have long backed the LNA and are trying to shore up its hold on the east. After 6 years of civil war, the division of Libya into a Turkish zone of influence in the west and a Russian zone in the east, in other words, de facto partition, looks increasingly likely. US President Donald Trump injected himself into the conversation on Libya last week, speaking with the leaders of Turkey and Egypt, the main backers of the GNA and Haftar, respectively. But Trump is unlikely to get involved in a foreign war, even in a diplomatic effort, in the run-up to the US presidential election. With no troops on the ground, neither Washington nor Brussels can wield real leverage over Libya's antagonists, and they have only limited influence over their sponsors. Egypt called for a ceasefire on June 13 under Egyptian presidential initiative, but the GNA's principal backer Turkey smells blood in the water. Ankara has dismissed Cairo's ceasefire offer as a call to save Haftar. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan wants Haftar out, not just from SIRT, but from any peace process. To discuss this issue with us from Paris is Mr. Robert Parsons, who's chief foreign editor at France 24. Thank you very much for being with us, Robert. Now, the collapse of Field Marshal Khalifa Haftar's 14-month siege of the capital Tripoli has changed the face of Libya's ongoing civil war. But the main question is, has it changed it for the better or the worse?
It's a good question, and I suppose it depends on how you look at it. I mean, if you live in Tripoli, it's certainly changed it a great deal for the better, because for the last 14 months, the people of Tripoli have been subjected to a pretty indiscriminate bombardment from General Haftar's forces. Many people have been killed, and if you live in some of the outlying towns where General Haftar's Libyan National Army has been based, like Tarhuna, for instance, to the south, which has been subjected to a pretty terrifying rule by some of the militias loyal to General Haftar. No question, they feel much happier that General Haftar has been moved further to the east. In the wider sense, though, is it good for Libya? Is it going to lead to a settlement in Libya? I think it's, first of all, far too early to say, but there is certainly no guarantee, I would say, that that's going to happen. One of the problems, I think, in Libya at the moment, accentuated by the shift in fortunes that we've seen over the last few weeks, has been the internationalization of the conflict. Mm-hmm. The fate of Haftar over the last few weeks has been determined effectively by the growing involvement of Turkey. Without Turkey's involvement, it wouldn't have happened. There's no question about it. Well, what does Turkey want?
That's the issue here, because Robert, Russia's foreign minister and its defense minister were supposedly going to visit Turkey on Sunday, June 14th, for discussions about Libya and maybe other issues. But something went wrong, and they canceled the visit even after the arrival of military personnel and Russian diplomats to Ankara, who were supposedly there to advance the arrival of the diplomats, the Russian foreign minister Sergei Lavrov and Shoigu, the defense minister. What happened to stop all of this all of a sudden?
It's a good question. If you listen to the Turkish foreign minister, Mevlut Çavuşoğlu, he says nothing happened at all. There is no disagreement on core principles, as he put it. But, the fact of the matter, as you pointed out, this is a well-planned meeting. All the work had been done on the ground, was ready to go, and it's clearly important. What seems to have happened, I think, first of all, reading between the lines and what President Erdogan is saying at the moment, is that the Turks want to finish the business that they've started together with the Government of National Accord forces on the outskirts of Sirte, to take the town. They feel confident that they're going to do that, despite the fact that General Haftar's forces still have air supremacy around the town. They feel confident they can do that. The other factor, I think, which may have played in the decision not to go ahead with the summit at this stage, is a possible disagreement between the Russians and the Turks over the future role of the president of the House of Representatives, the alternative parliament, in effect, based in Tobruk, as opposed to Tripoli, where the GNA is, Agilis Saleh. Now, they seem to be happy on the GNA side that Agilis Saleh should replace General Haftar as the person to negotiate with, but they're not happy that the Russians may want to see a greater role for Saleh, perhaps even supplanting Fayez al-Sarraj, the Prime Minister of the GNA. That may be what's at the heart of the problem, but we can't say for certainty that that is the case.
Well, Robert, one remainder of the war's unfinished business that happened last week, despite the fact that Haftar lost the oil fields, is that gunmen, unknown gunmen for that matter, shut down two of the country's biggest oil fields, which had only recently been brought back online. But how realistic and effective are all those side talks outside Libya when on the ground the scene is very far from what's happening in the diplomatic corridors?
Yeah, I mean, the scene inside Libya, as you suggested, highly volatile. There are a toxic mix of militias, tribal groups, groups loyal to different religious organizations. And on top of that, as I've been saying, there's the role being played by Turkey, the role being played by Russia. And besides that, there's Egypt, there's United Arab Emirates. This is a terrible mixture of things, with all kinds of different equations and rivalries being played out at the same time. And as we saw, as you said, the case of the oil fields that you mentioned, one of the biggest in Libya, for a while, just for a few days, it started operating again, and then militias assumed to be loyal to Haftar took over it again. It's very difficult to impose one's authority. But perhaps, if the Russians, if the Turks do come to an agreement and engage themselves deeper than they are already, they may be able to impose some sort of order on it. But the problem with that is, are they prepared to be sucked into the quagmire of Libya? My own feeling is that the Russians certainly won't want to see that. They're already heavily engaged in Syria. And worrying about the future there and the economic costs of that. Do they really want to be sucked into Libya? I would have thought not. Does Turkey want to be there alone? I'm not sure they do either.
Well, taken from what you said, especially about Syria, we do see that Turkey is having some sort of a hard time maybe positioning itself in Syria. Some even call it an occupation. But we see that Yeni Shafak newspaper which is a Turkish newspaper, they are citing military sources in Ankara that they will be sending troops to Turkish troops to Libya to have new military bases, especially two military bases, one El Watiya air base, which is being now reoperated by Turkey, adding that Ankara will put anti-craft systems and drones inside El Watiya air base, in addition to giving Turkey another military base in Misrata. Now, the Turkish gains in this one are obvious and mainly revolve around oil. Correct me if I'm wrong here. But what are the gains for Libya when you have soldiers coming from across the sea to sit on their land?
It's a very good question. As you say, the potential gains for Turkey are big, although it's a high-risk strategy as well. Look at the list of countries that are opposed to what Turkey is doing at the moment. We've heard France just over the last 24 hours saying that what Turkey is doing is unacceptable. The fact that Turkey is pouring weapons against the UN arms embargo on Libya into the country is clearly at odds with the United Nations. Turkey finds itself in conflict with France, with Italy potentially, with Greece, over Greece's economic zone, exclusive economic zone, with Egypt, with Israel perhaps as well, with Cyprus. These are a lot of potential problems that are going to stack up for Turkey in the future if it carries on with this policy. What's in it for Libya, you're asking? Well, I suppose you could argue that if the Turkish presence, together with an agreement perhaps with Russia, leads to some sort of stability in Libya, that might be a price worth paying. But we're an awful long way from reaching that yet. And as I was hinting earlier on, United Arab Emirates and Egypt are not happy about the Turkish presence there. They have a completely different plan themselves for how Libya should develop. The United Arab Emirates, which has supplied weapons to the LNA and is continuing to supply weapons to the LNA forces in Sirte at this moment, does not accept the sort of political Islam agenda that Recep Tayyip Erdogan has, or may have at least, for Libya in the future.
Well, Robert Parsons, Chief Foreign Editor at France 24, thank you very much for joining us from Paris to talk with us about the latest developments in Libya. And thank you for watching. Please stay tuned next week for more from the Mideastream.